This video covers an outline of the life of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, reading from Experiencing the World's Religions, 5th edition by Michael Malloy. Here's a little beginning introduction to the life of the Buddha. India in the 5th century BCE was in a state of religious ferment. Great enthusiasm for personal religious experience led people to experiment with meditation and deep breathing and to study with gurus. A growing number of schools of philosophy taught new ways of thinking, some of which opposed the growth of the priestly Vedic religion. Into this world came Siddhartha Gautama, who would come to be known as the Buddha or the Awakened One. Because so many devout legends have grown up around the story of the Buddha's life and teaching, it is sometimes hard to separate fact from fiction. Although there is no single authoritative biography of the Buddha, his legendary life follows these outlines. And he goes in to then share the outline of the Buddha's life, the main elements that are found in virtually every biography of his or every sketch of his life. What I wanted to do was to have you read this book and read this chapter and see the basic outline here. And then I was going to share with you an outline of the Buddha's life that I found living in China. This outline of his life I found at Keyan Scenic Spot, and I want to have you read the outline here and then compare the version of the Buddha's life that I found at Keyan Scenic Spot at a Buddhist temple at this location in Shaoxing, China. And just compare the two and see what the differences are. As he said, many legends have grown up about the Buddha's life, and it's very hard to separate the fact from fiction in terms of what actually occurred during the Buddha's life. Some scenery from the Keyan Scenic Spot is this great image right here. On the right, it's called the, I think if I remember right, it was the Bone Cloud. Kind of neat name for that rock structure. The way that Bone Cloud actually formed, I mean, it's a very interesting rock formation. People may look and go, how could that just kind of happen? But it was not natural by any means. That is what was left over from a rock quarry. So at one point in time there was a rock quarry here, and you can think that there was rock all the way up to the top of that pillar there on the right, and they dug down, and so everything on the ground level, the walking level there around the pond, used to just be solid rock that eventually was cut into, and they ended up leaving this bone pillar, which they called like the Bone Cloud. And then on the left is another image. This is just directly across where I took the picture of the Bone Cloud there on the right. I was standing pretty much right in front of the Buddha image that you see on the left when I took that picture. So you can get this idea of just some of the practices they may have with Buddhism, like carving images of the Buddha into rock structures, and then there on the picture on the left you see these giant incense sticks burning in front of that cliff statue of the Buddha that was carved there with offerings of flowers in front of it. And then if you look behind the Buddha, you can see some buildings there on the right of that Buddha statue. Those buildings are part of the Buddhist temple in which I saw the following outline of the Buddha's life. When I entered into the temple, I could see on the outside wall, all around the outside perimeter of the wall, there were various murals that depicted step by step an outline of the Buddha's life. And so I'm going to share the murals that I found at this Buddhist temple with you, and with each mural there was a caption in Chinese and then below it in English depicting what events were occurring in the Buddha's life that the mural represented. The very first one, of course, is Queen Maya and the white elephant. You see the Queen Maya there on the right with her husband on the far left. So you see that this was, I wouldn't say a virgin conception, but definitely a conception which occurred without sexual intercourse. She was dreaming, and this white elephant in her dream entered her side, and that was the moment that she conceived Siddhartha, the future Buddha. At the Buddha's birth, he could walk and talk. As soon as he was born, he stood up and he pointed to heaven and he said, "Between heaven and earth, only I hold the supreme position." And there on the bottom left, you see an image of his mom dying when he was 7 days old. He was then raised by his aunt, but his father remarried later on. As a young child, he loved all creatures. He would ask questions like, why do we kill, and why are there slaves? Why is there pain and suffering? So he asked a lot of questions. He's a very thoughtful child, which brought the king to refer to him as the timid prince, or the gentle prince. Definitely, he was showered with all the luxuries of life from birth onward. So here you see images even of his king, and then, or the king, his father, and his, I guess his stepmom, his second mom, because his dad remarried, taking care of him, and just people waiting on him hand and foot. As he grew up, he asked a lot of questions. Where is the sun's home? Why do birds fly? How old are the mountains? So his father gave him a teacher, and what he discovered from the teachings is that the soul is eternal. He then married, and what was interesting, on the night that he married, he was very sad and depressed because he just couldn't stop thinking about all these deep questions of life. And so on his wedding night, instead of staying with his bride, he fled and left his wife, fleeing the palace. He had not yet left the palace before, because his father kept him in this palace just to ensure that he wasn't exposed to the sufferings of life, and would be sure to be a king, because he knew he was thoughtful and very introspective on life. And so when he fled, he was exposed to suffering for the first time. The king then sent a chariot out to retrieve the prince and brought him back. When they brought him back, he still couldn't stop thinking about all these different forms of suffering that he saw on his outing. So the king, devised a trip for him to leave the palace one spring, and the idea was to have this nice outing that would make sure he only saw good things, pleasant things, and mistakenly they ended up crossing a funeral procession, which you see on the bottom left, and so that brought him to some questions. And then on the way back, they meet this wise, wandering monk that you see on the top there, dressed in red. And the prince, Siddhartha, asked this wandering monk the question, how do you get to a state of life but no life, and death but no death? And the monk told him, this is the greatest question you can be asking. And from that moment on, hearing that this is the greatest question, the state of life but not life, death but not left, and death but not death, he realized, this was like a beacon of light for him, a path for him to pursue, to find the answer to this question. He wanted to go out and wander the countryside, to live the life of an ascetic in order to reach enlightenment, but of course his father had other plans. His father, threw lots of women at him and lots of pleasures in life, but none of these pleased the young Prince Siddhartha. So he ended up seeking answers from a wise hermit in a cave. The father gave him permission to do this. Just to give you an image of what I actually saw at the temple, here's the post here's the caption that went with that image. It says, the king, Suddhodana, invited a Buddhist priest to accompany with the prince, hoping that he could relieve the prince's puzzles and miseries to arouse the prince's desire and pursuit for life. The priest recommended his friend, Visamidadava, a hermit living in a cave. The priest went with the prince for a long way to find a teacher. On the way, the prince saw the farmers, stripped to the waist, were toiling hard in the fields with the scorching sun directly overhead. After a long and arduous journey, the prince came to a dark stone cave in the mountain to pay a formal visit to the teacher. After seeing the spiritual beings and the large python, the prince something felt that his mind became bright and transparent. He told the master, I feel it is full of sunshine here. The old man sighed, it's so hard to meet a bosom friend. He agreed readily to go to the palace and to be the prince's teacher. And so there you get the image of all that occurring. Just after meeting the hermit, he encountered the prophet. So here's another cool image, and this caption is describing that image. It says, when King Suddhodana met the prince's teacher, he merely granted him the title of state master and asked him to live in the depository of the Buddhist text. The state master often fed the owls with the fruit of parasol trees and said, when the owls eat the fruit, they will sing like orioles. King Suddhodana was quite puzzled by the master's explanation. The master continued, since your majesty know that it is almost impossible to change one's natural instincts, why do you still want to change that of the prince's? The prince is determined to explore the truth of life, which is indeed his nature. I sincerely hope your majesty would help the prince fulfill his great ambition to relieve all the creatures out of misery. One day a good friend of the master came to pay a visit and tell the prince's fortune. He asserted with great certainty that the prince would reach great enlightenment and definitely become a Buddha one day. So that's just an example of what I was getting to read and experience in China, looking at this temple with the murals. So with that blessing, at the age 29, Siddhartha left with his father's permission, and he went to find the answers to life and death. And if you look on the bottom left, you see at this point there's this very small baby lying next to who's his wife, and so he actually left his wife and child behind to seek the answers to life and death that he wanted to find. What he found was a lot of people having these aesthetic practices, maybe trying to burn themselves, to hang themselves upside down, to fast day and night. Just a lot of these practices that he saw weren't actually producing life. He saw that it was just the grinning of death and not the voice of truth. After a while of searching for answers, the king sent servants to bring him back to the palace. But the Buddha, of course, after what he's already seen and experienced and learned, was pretty much like, I'm not going back yet. I've made an oath to find the answer to my questions, and I'm not going to return until I have. And at this point, you already see the halo which has appeared around him through every image is getting a little bit bigger, and his ears are getting longer themselves. He ended up sitting under a tree for 6 years in fasting, and throughout this entire time, he did not grow any closer to finding the answers that he sought, but in fact he just became very weak and to the point of death. At this temple, they actually said he didn't eat and drink anything for 6 years, which seems highly impossible, but that's what the Buddhist temple here claims the Buddha did, and that actually doesn't make sense either. If he saw the grinning of death here with their ascetic practices, that he would pick it up himself, but that's what is claimed at this temple. And you can see he has his 5 companions down there. They end up leaving him when he ends up giving up his practice of asceticism once he gave up without finding enlightenment. This girl gives him some water to drink, or some milk to drink from this cow, and it restores his strength. At this point is when he ends up finding a middle path instead of extreme asceticism. He takes this middle path, so instead of stripping away all the desires of the flesh by lacking sleep, food, and water, or going the other extreme of indulging in all the greatness of whatever the sinful nature can desire, he took to the middle path. He was in meditation underneath what's now called the Bodhi tree for an entire night, and you see all these great experiences going on in his head. And eventually, here we are in the middle of the temple. We've walked along one side and around to the middle, and you see this image of the Buddha. So you could have just walked straight down the middle of the temple and reached this Buddha, or you can walk along the sides where all these murals are. And so the idea is where this position is here is where he's actually reached enlightenment. And then moving on around to the other sides of the temple walls, you see what happens once he reaches enlightenment. It's a lot of different stories, where this is one where he encounters these thieves that stole a bunch of treasure, and he pretty much tells them that they're wrong with what they're doing. They instantly see how great he is and drop their swords and repent of their wrongdoing. He gives many sermons on Buddhism, and you see how he's gaining more and more followers wherever he goes. Siddhartha listens to this one man who comes to him at night to learn more about his teachings. In this one, Siddhartha returns home, and by now you see he's getting very, very tall with now 3 halos, and his ears keep growing. But the king, his father, and all of his servants end up becoming his disciples and following him and doing and practicing what he teaches them about this middle path to reach enlightenment. His wife and his son also become his followers. So his wife then becomes a Buddhist nun, and his son a Buddhist monk, and follow him. Here's another story they had of Nanda, who was this prince who just lived to full indulgence and everything that the flesh had to offer. And the Buddha then showed him images of hell and what he could experience if he kept on the path that he was on. And then the flip side was heaven, and obviously heaven seems to be exactly everything that he wanted in this life. So the image here seems to be, if you follow my path, you can get everything that you experience now in life that you really love forever, and if you don't follow my path now, you can end up experiencing hell forever. And then there's this other story where there's this adulterous woman who's brought to him, and the people want to basically kill her for what she's done. But the Buddha offers her forgiveness, and everyone's like, "Oh wow, look at his forgiveness and his charity." Probably sounds familiar, doesn't it? Also, there was an assassination plot against the Buddha, but when the assassins come to him, they see how great he is and how wise, and they instantly drop their swords and bow and start to devote themselves to him. But you can see on the top left, there's a person up there on the cliff with a boulder. He plans to still follow through if the assassination attempt, for whatever reason, he was not swayed. But what ended up happening to him was an avalanche occurred when he tried to roll the boulder over to crush the Buddha. So the leader of the assassination plot suffered death. You just see more stories here, and eventually you see him die. And again, he died lying on his right side. It's a very typical image of the Buddha, and what's said is that when he died peacefully, and he was never to be reincarnated again, and that he pronounced that he would not be born again before his death. So that's an overview of images. Pretty much the main thing you need to know on all the outlines of the Buddha's life is that he was born in the 4th century BC likely. Siddhartha Gautama is the founder of Buddhism. His conception was miraculous, as well as his birth. That wasn't necessarily, I didn't share that through this outline, but they even say that instead of coming through the natural route of being born, he was born out of the side of his mother. He started in Hinduism, but he found a middle path, and he diverged from Hindu teachings. He came to enlightenment under what is now called the Bodhi tree, and Bodhi means enlightenment, and the Buddha means the enlightened one. And then the Buddha spent the rest of his life teaching people the middle path and what's possible for them to achieve when they follow this middle path. And so future videos on Buddhism will address what his actual teachings were about how to attain enlightenment and what following this middle path would entail.